So good afternoon and welcome to our series of lectures in Baha'i studies. And today we are honored and privileged to host Dr. Elham Afnan, who has a PhD in English from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. A doctoral dissertation, Unity in Diversity, Multivalence in British and American Literary Utopias, 1880 to 1980. She has been since January 2005 to the present administrative assistant to the Secretary General of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Norway. And in 1997 she held the post of lecturer both at the Department of British and American Studies in the University of Oslo and Department of English at the University of Bergen. Her publications, part of her publications are articles on the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, a study of modern utopian and dystopian literature, published in the Journal of Baha'i Studies in 1989, Abdul Baha and Ezra Pound's Circle, also the Journal of Baha'i Studies in 1995, Chaos and Utopia, Social Transformation in Woman on the Edge of Time, in Extrapolation in 1996, and a lot more. Her key qualifications are in English literature, specializing in 19th century British literature, translation from and into English, Norwegian and Persian, editing and proofreading at high level, and she masters the language of English, Norwegian, Persian, Russian, and French. And and Serbian.
Not Serbian.
And the topic of her lecture today is the goodly gifts, a brief history of the Afnan family, which are very keen to hear. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm very grateful to have been invited and to have so many of you here.
Just to make sure, you promised Roy that we can get the PowerPoint presentation,
yes.
So I don't have to know it.
No, actually, I must say the PowerPoint is more of a kind of support to what I'm going to say.
Okay.
It doesn't. You're welcome to
Okay,
it, but
okay,
it doesn't help
okay,
very much by
okay.
itself. But if you can get the paper
Sure.
later on, if you like.
Oh, that's great.
So thank you. I was asked to speak about the Afnan family, and as you know, this is the family of the Bab, the forerunner of the Baha'i faith, and the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, who is the founder of the Baha'i faith. And I've tried to talk about both the contributions of the Afnan family to the Baha'i faith and their place in Iranian society as much as possible. I chose to do this mostly by focusing on individual members of the Afnan family who have distinguished themselves in one or both of these areas, but also to provide a general overview of what you might call the demographics of the family, where they came from, where they moved, their social position and standing in society, their professions and trades, achievements and services, and so on. And I hope other scholars, and I see that there are some who have already done this, that other scholars will delve deeper into this topic and find more sources and documentation and original material that can give a deeper and broader understanding of the history of the family. Both the Bab and Baha'u'llah refer in their writings to themselves as the Sadratul Muntaha, the sacred lote tree, or the tree beyond which there is no passing, and this is a reference from the Quran, and it refers to the manifestation of God, to the messenger of God. But Baha'u'llah extended the range of this image by giving his sons the title of Aqsan, which means branches, and he refers to the women in his family as Waraqat, leaves. And he also bestowed on the relatives of the Bab the title of Afnan, which is twigs. and he addresses all of them in the book of his covenant in these words. He says, "O ye my Aghsan, my Afnan, and my kindred, we exhort you to fear God, to perform praiseworthy deeds, and to do that which is meet and seemly." At the same time, Baha'u'llah writes that no one in this world can claim any relationship to me except those who in all their deeds and their conduct follow my example. So the simple fact of relationship in a way is not enough. It's what one does with that relationship that makes one worthy or unworthy. And sadly, most of Baha'u'llah's own family did not value their attachment to this tree and cut themselves off from it, whereas by contrast nearly all of the Bab's family became Babis and later Baha'is. The Bab himself, Sayyid Ali Muhammad al-Shirazi, came from a family of merchants. His father, Sayyid Muhammad Reza, was a mercer or a dealer in textiles and cloth from Shiraz, and his uncles on his mother's side were all merchants of very high standing in Shiraz and Bushehr in the south of Iran. He lost his father when he was very young and was raised by one of his uncles, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. And after receiving some basic schooling according to the custom of the time, he joined his uncle in business at about the age of 15. And he moved from Shiraz to Bushehr shortly afterwards, and it appears that he took over the complete management of the trading house in Bushehr when he was around 20 years old, and continued in that position for about 2 years. He was widely known in the region for his scrupulous attention to detail and his fairness in transactions. And he, in one of his own writings, in one of his prayers, he refers to this period when he was working as a merchant in Bushehr, and he refers to his occupation as trading in the goodly gifts of God's realm. And here I thought this was an interesting phrase because he subtly combines the worldly and the spiritual. The gifts of the realm can mean, on the one hand, the products of the land, the fruits of the earth, as it were, which are what he trades in. But at the same time, they are the gifts of God's realm, that which God has favored him with. And so he infuses his worldly trade with spiritual significance and sets a kind of standard for his family and for his followers to conduct their own trades and professions in the same way. And so that's why I chose this as the part of the title of my paper, because many of the Afnan did indeed try to follow the Bab's example in conducting their lives in a way that combined earning a livelihood with serving the faith that they believed in. And I suppose I have to say that most of the sources that write at all about the Afnan, I mean, most of the sources write about them only insofar as it's relevant to the life and teachings and writings and so on of the Bab himself. And most sources write about the Afnan in terms of their relationship to the Babi and Baha'i faith, and not independently. It's not there's not much information about their other activities independently of how it relates to the faith. So that's just to be aware of that. Okay, the Bab's relatives on his father's side did not become Babis and are not actually called Afnan. There were a couple of his father's cousins who were eminent Shia divines, and they bore allegiance or supported the Bab secretly. One of them was Mirza Shirazi, who is quite a well-known and influential ecclesiastic of that time, and he is known for having wrecked the tobacco regime, which was the monopoly that Nasruddin Shah had given to the British. And there's an interesting story there that we can go back to if you want. And the other was Haji Said Jawad, the Imam Jum'eh of Kerman, who also extended his protection to the Babis. But it's basically the mother's side who the Afnan belonged to. And the mother of the Bab, Fatima Begum, was the daughter of Mirza Muhammad Hussain, a merchant of Shiraz, and she had three brothers, Haji Mirza Said Muhammad, Haji Mirza Said Ali, and Haji Mirza Hassan Ali, of whom I will speak later. And I should mention that this family tree that's hanging there is the whole of the Afnan family up to about 5 or 6 years ago. And my father prepared this with the help of some of the friends here at the Baha'i World Center. And I put it there not to be used really, but just to give an impression of the extent of the family and the interconnections, because that's one of the things that we'll talk about, that they were all, many of them were married to other relatives, and you can trace your ancestry back through various branches. In August 1842, okay, sorry, actually I forgot my PowerPoint. Sorry that I didn't really have access to a good family tree program, so this is actually based on something for organizational charts, so it's not. But anyway, you can see that Fatima Begum, the mother of the Bab, her brothers, the father, Sayyid Muhammad Ali, and that's the Bab. And in 1842, he married Khadija Begum, who was a cousin of his mother, that they were related. And they had a son in 1843 whom they named Ahmad, but he did not live long, so that the Bab had no direct descendants. Khadija Begum had two brothers and a sister. The brothers Haji Mirza Said Hassan and Haji Mirza Abul Qasim, and the sister Zahra Begum. And so it's the descendants of those three uncles and the two brothers and sister of the wife of the Bab. These are who the Afnan are. They are all the descendants of these two sets of siblings, as it were. If there's anything that's unclear or questions along the way, you're welcome to ask, because it can get a little bit complicated with all the names and relationships.
When have they adopted the, so to speak, family name, second name, Afnan?
It was a name given to them by Baha'u'llah later, not at that time, of course, but later on he called all the relatives of the Bab Afnan, which means twigs, so that they were the twigs or branches from the tree of the Bab. And then the family decided to use that as the family name.
So it wasn't a laqab, it was really, it has become family name.
Well, yes, because he addressed it to many of them. It wasn't only one person's title. He refers to them collectively in that way as well.
Actually, in the Persian sources, they are not known as Afnan. In the non-Baha'i Persian sources, they are almost all of them Shirazi.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes, at the time of the Bab and the uncles, but later on, well, yes, I suppose. I mean, even the Bab himself probably isn't called the Bab in non-Baha'i sources. Sometimes he's called,
Yes.
you know, Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, known as the Bab or something like that. So, but when the time came for them to, because at a certain point nobody had last names anyway.
Right.
But later, when they had to
documents
register,
a thing like that. You know, when it first appears?
I suppose when they started registering last names, you know, in birth certificates and so on. Before that, it was used, you know, when people talked about them in the Baha'i community, but of course it wasn't registered.
Context, yes. The Baha'i context, that's right.
Yes. Sure. So the first period that I would like to talk about begins then with the declaration of the Bab in 1844, May 23rd, 1844, and ends with the passing of Abdul Baha, the son and successor of Baha'u'llah. And again, in the Baha'i context, it's often called the heroic age of the Baha'i faith. This was the period when a lot of intense persecution was going on, and it also witnessed the expansion of first the Babi and then later the Baha'i community from being limited to Iran. It extended first to neighboring countries and then to the east and later to America and Europe. And the fortunes of the Afnan family in many ways followed that of the Baha'i community in general in this time. For example, during the Bab's own lifetime, most of his relatives lived in Shiraz and some in Bushehr and Yazd. The next generation, that of his cousins and the nephews of his wife, spread beyond the confines of Iran, and their trade took them to Egypt, Russia, India, China, and some of them even came to the Holy Land and lived here for some time. Not for trade, of course, but yes, for Baha'i reasons. In other ways, the Afnan were quite different from the population at large, not from the population, but from the other Baha'is, in that they were during this period merchants and landowners and were quite prosperous. They were known and respected in the community, both as a family of Sayyids who could trace their ancestry back to the Prophet Muhammad, and because of their reputation for honesty and trustworthiness. And in times of persecution, they enjoyed a measure of immunity and could even sometimes extend some protection to other Baha'is. They were at the same time very much restricted by surrounding society, so in that the prejudice against the Baha'is and the ever-present yet unpredictable threat of violence and sudden eruptions of violence isolated the family in many ways. For example, as I mentioned, for many generations they married basically only relatives whom they knew and trusted, and very seldom anyone outside of the larger family. And while the majority of them considered themselves Baha'is, there were a number of them who made discretion their watchword and practiced their faith privately, but didn't really talk about it very much in public. Yeah, so just so we can have this in the background. But there were a number of outstanding members of the family, however, and it's on these that I would like to concentrate a little bit. The first among them or the first person in the family to believe in the Bab was his wife, Khadija Begum. They were cousins, as you can see, and they grew up together, and she seems to have been a spiritually receptive young woman and was frequent witness to her husband's greatness and his power and his station. For example, she recounted that the Bab often perused what seemed to be business papers in the evenings, and after a while she noticed that these were in fact not account books, they weren't business papers, and when she asked him what they were, he smiled and answered, "These are the books of the reckoning of the people of the world." And I thought it was an interesting answer because it kind of brings in that trade merchandise idea, but of course he's talking in spiritual terms. And shortly before the Bab's public declaration in May 1844, his wife had an experience that one night after the household had gone to bed, she found him in an upper chamber of the house, and his hands raised to heaven and intoning a prayer in a beautiful voice with tears streaming down his face. His face was luminous, rays of light radiated from it. And the following morning she talked to him about how her confusion and anxiety at seeing him transformed in this way and he said to her that it had been God's will that she should see him in this condition, so that later on she would have no doubts about who he was, and I suppose to be able to go through the sufferings that were to come later with confidence. And indeed their time together was very short. The Bab was forced to leave Shiraz for Isfahan in 1846 and never returned to his native city after that. And in one of his letters to his wife, which was actually written at a different trip, but he addresses her in very touching terms. He says, "My sweet love, God is my witness that since the time of separation, sorrow has been so intense that it cannot be described." And again, I think the human side, or the family affections that existed there are interesting to look at. Women at that time were very limited in their contact with the outside world, outside their homes, and the wife and mother of the Bab had to rely on fragmentary news from that they received through their male relatives, so that, for example, the news of the death of the Bab did not reach them until almost a year after it had taken place. And after this, Khadija Begum, the wife of the Bab, was left desolate and largely alone for many, many years. When Baha'u'llah declared his mission, and he said that he was the one that the Bab had, because as you know, the Bab had said that he was the herald of one who would come later, and one whom he called him whom God shall make manifest. So he, Baha'u'llah in 1863 said that he was the one that the Babis had been waiting for, and he sent Nabil Zarandi, a well-known Baha'i who is also known as an historian. He sent him to Shiraz to announce this to the Babis, and Khadija Begum immediately accepted the claim of Baha'u'llah, and she said that I experienced the same feeling as I had that night standing at the threshold of the upper chamber of our home, and became certain that what God had promised had come to pass. So then to move on to the three uncles of the Bab, who are the first, or no, okay. These three maternal uncles of the Bab were also highly respected in the community. They were merchants of high standing and renown, and they seem to all have been closely associated with their nephew. Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, the second oldest, so the one in the middle there, he was the one who had been the Bab's guardian from childhood, and he lived in Shiraz during that period. And when the Bab declared his mission, he went on pilgrimage to Mecca, and upon returning he sent a letter to this uncle, and Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali was immediately convinced of the truth of his nephew's cause and became his follower. About 3 years later, in 1848, he left Shiraz for good and abandoned his commercial pursuits altogether. He visited the Bab, who was at that time in exile in Chehri, in the northwestern part of Iran, and then went to Tehran. In March 1850, 14 Baha'is Babis were arrested in Tehran, and pressure was put on them to recant their faith. 7 of them yielded, and the other 7 who refused to recant were put to death. And the first of them was Haji Sayyid Ali. They are known as the 7 Martyrs of Tehran in Baha'i history. A considerable number of the affluent merchants of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali's acquaintance, including even the Malekot Tojar, the most prominent merchant in the bazaar, the city offered to pay a ransom to free him, but he refused and said that if he did that, it would be as if he were renouncing all the prophets of the past and Muhammad himself. So although he is the second in age among the three brothers, he is known as Khala Azam, the most great uncle. That's his title. The eldest, Haji Mirza Said Muhammad, who is known as Khala Akbar, or the greater uncle, the great uncle, lived and carried out his business in Bushehr. And he was very staunch in supporting his nephew and giving him all the protection and support he could as a family member, but he was not a believer at that time, and he had many doubts and questions. Some years after the martyrdom of the Bab, another member of the family who had become a Babi encouraged Haji Mirza Said Muhammad to visit Baha'u'llah in Baghdad at that time. And Baha'u'llah had not yet announced his mission, but he was recognized as the leader of the Babi community. So Haji Mirza Said Muhammad went to Baghdad in 1862 and met with Baha'u'llah, who asked him what stood in the way of his becoming a Baha'i, or actually not becoming a Baha'i, but of recognizing the Bab. And Haji Mirza Said Muhammad indicated that he had a number of questions and wrote these down on Baha'u'llah's instruction. And then Baha'u'llah revealed a book that is now known as Kitab-e-Iqan, the Book of Certitude, which is one of his most important works in answer to these questions. And after reading the Kitab-e-Iqan, then Haji Mirza Said Muhammad became a believer, and then later on he also accepted Baha'u'llah. But throughout most of his life he was very reticent about saying that he was a Baha'i, and only a couple of years before his death, in his will and testament, he testified to it sort of openly. And finally, the youngest uncle, Haji Mirza Hassan Ali, known as Khala Asqar, the younger uncle, had a branch of the family business in Yazd. And he also had the opportunity to visit Baha'u'llah, but he didn't want to, he refused. His wife's brother, sometime later, was a Baha'i known as Muballigh, or teacher, who came to Yazd. And he had long discussions with Haji Mirza Hassan Ali and Mirza Said Hassan, one of the brothers-in-law of the Bab. And Haji Mirza Hassan Ali continued to hesitate, and finally he made his acceptance conditional on that of Mirza Said Hassan, the brother-in-law, because he was known within the family for his knowledge and erudition, and was highly respected. And when finally Mirza Said Hassan accepted or acknowledged Baha'u'llah's claims, so did Mirza Hassan Ali. And I talked about this at some length because I think that different responses of these three uncles is representative of the different ways in which the Afnan at large, and even the community, the people at large, responded to this new religion. Haji Mirza Said Ali, the first, he accepted the new faith intuitively and spontaneously. He didn't think of consequences, or didn't have any reservations. And he's said to have gone to his death reciting verses from Hafiz and Rumi to express his rapture and joy. The other uncle, Haji Mirza Said Muhammad, needed arguments and proofs to be convinced, but he was a just man, so that when he got persuasive answers to his questions, he accepted them. And then the third one, the third uncle, he needed even more than proofs and arguments. He needed the support of someone else who he trusted and could rely on, and needed personal contact and encouragement in order to be transformed. And
wasn't the fact that his two elder brother joined the faith, it wasn't enough personal or enough?
Apparently not. It's and that's another interesting point, that they didn't become believers because it was their nephew who had made this claim, or as you say, because the older brothers exerted any influence on the younger. They found their way independently and each in his own way, and I think that's perhaps a tribute to their sincerity and the depth of their belief, that and their independence of mind, really, that they didn't make it, they didn't do it because somebody else told them to. Okay. So these are the two brothers of the wife of the Bab, Haji Mirza Sayyid Hassan, who has the title Afnan Kabir, the Great Afnan, and Haji Mirza Abul Qasim. And I'm sorry that the quality of these pictures is not very good. I've taken them from a scanned copy of a book, which even the original book isn't that great. So anyway, Haji Mirza Sayyid Hassan, which I mentioned earlier, he had already as a youth begun to study sciences and the arts, and was well versed in such sciences as mathematics, geometry, geography, and even astronomy. And this is, to us it might sound not like a big deal, but for a family of merchants, even, I mean, in some cases, even being literate and having read books was quite an achievement, let alone studying various sciences in this way. And although he was, in fact, a merchant by profession, he spent only a short part of the day at his business and devoted the rest of his time to study and discussion. He became interested in the Shaykhi school and had transcribed a number of treatises by Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai and Sayyid Kazem Rashdi. And in the 1880s, he lived in Beirut for some time and met a scholar there whom Abdul Baha mentions as Khaja Fendek. I don't know how exactly you pronounce it, but this seems to be a reference to Cornelius Van Dyck, an American doctor and missionary who lived in Beirut in that period. And this person warmly praised the erudition of the great Afnan in various circles, saying that an individual of such wide and diverse learning was rare throughout the East. Later on, towards the end of his life, Haji Mirza Sayyid Hassan came to the Holy Land and lived near Bahji, near Akka, for some time. And Abdul Baha writes that he would often occupy himself with uncovering the secrets of the heavens, contemplating in their detail the movement of the stars. He had a telescope with which he would make observations every night. And Baha'u'llah gave him the title of Afnan Kabir, the Great Afnan. The next generation of the family extended the family's commercial interests considerably, and they established what amounted to a trading empire. They had businesses in Hong Kong, Ashgabat, Beirut, and several places in Egypt, as well as partners in Istanbul and the Caucasus. A nephew of the wife of the Bab established a prosperous publishing house and a printing press in Bombay named Nasiri, and it was here that the first Baha'i books were printed. Some of the writings of Baha'u'llah were printed there for the first time. At the same time, some of the Afnans gradually became landowners in addition to being merchants. A number of them owned extensive properties and villages, even, that were farmed by tenants. Even to the time of my grandfather, some of this remained. So my father says that when he was a child, for example, he would go to the village and there would be people who had been tenants at least earlier who paid great respect to the family, and that tradition continued.
What time?
Well, this that I'm talking about is in the 1930s, I suppose, when my father was, yeah. But it began
in the late 90s?
I would think so, something like that, yes. Yeah.
It's a printing house in
Don't have the date here. I've cut down on this paper, so not all my facts are here. But I think in the 1870s or 80s, something like that.
I think the first,
Or is it later?
I think the first Baha'i books were published there about 1880.
Yeah.
So it was still during the lifetime of Baha'u'llah. So it
Yes,
must
yes,
have been
exactly. Yes,
In
something
Iran or in India?
in India.
in India. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Right. Anyway, and these younger Afnan were also much more actively involved in promoting the interests of the Baha'i faith, and more openly so. One of these is Agha Mirza Agha, known as Nuruddin, who was the son of Khadija Begum's sister, who I mentioned earlier. And it was Baha'u'llah again who gave them the title Nuruddin, Light of Faith. He was one of the earliest members of the family to become a Baha'i or become a Babi, although he was very young. And he was instrumental in teaching many others in the family about the new faith. He also continued in the family tradition of engaging in trade, and gradually he became so well known as an active Baha'i that his life was in danger in Shiraz. In 1879, there were two brothers, Baha'i brothers in Isfahan, who were martyred, and they had been business partners of Nuruddin. And so this intensified the danger, so that he was advised to leave the city. And he therefore settled first in Bombay and later on in Egypt. And there, together with some other Baha'is, established an import-export company called Sherkat al-Rohaniyeh. And this company had offices in Cairo, Port Said, and Alexandria between approximately 1887 and 1993. Just to go back a little bit, Baha'u'llah had given the custodianship of the house of the Bab, the house in which he had lived, and made his declaration to Khadija Begum, to his wife, and after her to her sister and her descendants. Following the martyrdom of the Bab, his wife had for a long time lived elsewhere, so that the house had fallen into disrepair. But in 1872, she repaired the house and made some changes to it and moved back into it, and lived there for about 10 years until her death. And after that, Zahra Begum, who was the mother of Nuruddin, she lived there for some years. And after she also died, Abdul Baha in 1901 instructed Nuruddin to wrap up his affairs in Egypt and return to Iran and restore the house. And this was a kind of period of very great danger for the Baha'is in Iran, but he was the only one still living who had the memory of how the house had originally looked like before all the changes, so that Abdul Baha insisted that he should go and do this as quickly as possible, and he was able to prepare a plan and rebuild the house, and in fact died very short time after it was completed. And so after him, the custodianship of the house passed to his son Habibullah Afnan, and after that to his son Abul Qasim Afnan, whom many people who have lived in Iran, many Baha'is remember as the custodian of the House of the Bab in Shiraz before it was destroyed in 1979 during the early years of the Iranian Revolution. And Habibullah and Abul Qasim and his brother Hassan, they were also writers and historians, so some of their memoirs and chronicles of the early history of the faith are very good sources of Baha'i history, and especially about the Afnan family, but they have been unpublished until very recently. I think one of the books by Habibullah Afnan has recently been translated and published. Right. And then the other son
in Tariq Amriya Fars.
Yes, yes. So that you see the picture of Habibullah Afnan, and then the other, and I must mention actually that these, as you can tell, these small family trees only show some of the children that I'm talking about, because most of these people had many more children, and some who died, some who aren't really part of the story that I'm telling here. So just to make that clear. So another son of Nuruddin was Agha Said Agha, who joined his father in business in Bombay and Egypt, and later on returned to Iran and was for a time the head of the post office in Yazd.
And the Reza Shah period?
No, I think it would be before that, probably.
Constitutional?
Uh,
Or in the between?
Before Reza Shah, I'm
Okay.
almost sure, but I don't know exactly
Okay.
what time. I can probably find out. Yes, and he also had a printing press in Shiraz, Baha'i printing press, and he was a very active person in the Baha'i community. He held Baha'i gatherings in his home. He looked after the needs of the believers in the surrounding regions. He traveled once a year and visited all the Baha'i communities in the province, and he sent reports of his activities to Baha'u'llah. And as some of you know, the Baha'i administration consists of kind of an elected branch and an appointed branch. And on the appointed side, there are individuals who are known as hands of the cause, who have the highest rank, and they have the task or the trust of teaching and protecting the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah himself appointed only 4 people to this position, but he said that there were others who were accounted as hands of the cause, even though they hadn't been officially given that title. And one of these seems to have been this Agha Said Agha Afnan, because in a letter addressed to him, Baha'u'llah writes, "It becomes, O my Afnan, upon thee rest my glory. It becomes you to guide the people. Through the mercy of God, exalted be his glory, thou art reckoned and mentioned among the Afnan of the holy tree and the hands of the cause in the book." So, okay. Now to yes, the uncles of the Bab, the Haji Mirza Said Ali had a son who died very young, so there are no descendants from him. But Haji Mirza Said Muhammad had several children, and there are many of the Afnan who are descended from them, but 2 of them are the ones who are most prominent in Baha'i history: Haji Mirza Muhammad Ali and Haji Mirza Muhammad Taghi, the Wakil al-Dawla. And they achieved great distinction both in business and within the Baha'i community. Haji Mirza Muhammad Ali, who was the oldest, lived first in Shiraz and then later on in Hong Kong. And he and his younger brother, Mirza Buzurg, another brother, are even mentioned in Fasai's Farsnameh Nasiri, which is a important book of history of that period. And he says that they have through many generations been engaged in commerce and have become renowned for their righteousness. In the 1860s, there was apparently a kind of depression in commercial activities in Shiraz, and that this was the reason that the Afnan started an import-export business in Hong Kong. They dealt in cloth and china and possibly some other types of wares. And Haji Mirza Muhammad Ali had virtual monopoly on Chinese porcelain that he had made on his specifications for the nobility and possibly even for the king. And Baha'u'llah also is known to have ordered pieces of porcelain to be given as gifts, for example, to dignitaries here in Akka. There was also a thriving opium trade in China at that time, and the two brothers acted as agents for the opium merchants in Fars and Isfahan and Yazd. And the Baha'is were, of course, prohibited from using using drugs or using opium, but it seems that in the early days there was no explicit ban on trading in it. Only later, in around 1890 or thereabouts, did Baha'u'llah explicitly prohibit the trade, and after that they stopped. There are two tablets written in that period in which Baha'u'llah, interestingly, he advises the Afnan on their business. He says that they should pay their debts promptly, simplify their trade to only one or two commodities, and instructs them to cease the trade in opium. And Haji Muhammad Ali visited Baha'u'llah in Akka, and he went there by way of Egypt and Marseille, and this suggests that perhaps he had some business dealings or connections or partners or something in Marseille as well. I'm going a little over the time, but I don't know how much time we have.
How much time you need?
Well, I could go on and on, but yeah, maybe a little longer. Abdul Wahab mentions, for example, that Haji Muhammad Ali arrived in Akka, and he could feel his arrival from a long distance away. He was coming by carriage, and Abdul Wahab said, "I feel that a holy being is in that carriage," even though he was hardly within sight even. And describes him as having a radiant face and nothing but light from head to foot. Just looking at him made one happy. He later on went to Bombay, where he became ill and died in 1897. And because the Muslims in Bombay refused to have him buried in their cemetery, the other Afnan decided to send his body to Iraq, to Baghdad, to be buried. And it proved impossible to find this burial place in Baghdad either, so that they finally buried him near Ctesiphon, the ruins of the ancient Sasanian palace. And again, Abdul Baha says that this was destiny, that after the lapse of 1300 years, this place should regain its honor by having him buried there. And he says that in the future, a Baha'i house of worship should hopefully be built in that area. Haji Muhammad Ali, the other brother, lived in Yazd, and he was a highly respected merchant and became Malikut Tujjar in Yazd. And he was, because of his prominence, he was asked by the Russian government to be their commercial agent, and he became thus known as Vakil Dole, the representative of the government. And then Baha'u'llah later gave him the title Vakil al-Haq, the representative of God. And Yazd has become notorious for its persecutions of the Baha'is on a number of occasions. But the Afnan were largely spared. They were treated with respect by the government officials and dignitaries. And Haji Muhammad Ali in particular was highly regarded because of his deeds and personality, which set him apart from the others. Abdul Baha says that even enemies bore witness to his high-mindedness and his spiritual qualities, and they would say, "There is none to compare with this man for his words and acts, his righteousness, trustworthiness, and strong faith. In all things he is unique. What a pity that he is a Baha'i."
There's actually a quote by Amin al-Zab, who is, there are traders that are with him in the Caravanserai Khaje in Yazd, and they're saying that because of this Babi, nobody comes to the Caravanserai, and they took over the whole Caravanserai, and they attack him. And then Amin al-Zab saying, Well, although he is a Babi, he is a respected man, and he is attest to his integrity, and we should respect him. It's
Yes.
very
Mm.
coming from such a person
Yes.
who is very close to the nobility of Iran.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the interesting point is that while everybody knew that he was Baha'i, he was nevertheless in such a high position. The position was recognized by the government.
Mm.
First, you were elected by the big merchants of the place of Yazd, and then the governor, the Hakim, at that time it was still, I think, Zir Sultan, had to rectify it.
Yes, so it's
While everybody knew he was bad.
yes, that's kind of mysterious actually. That
Well, he was a Sayyid first. I mean, because of his being a Sayyid, he was respected by Shiites.
yes,
Although, I mean,
yes, of
many
course.
people didn't understand the Babi issue. I mean, they gave
perhaps
respect
not.
because of and his integrity. I mean, his person's behavior and was very
Yes.
respectful.
Yes.
And he was connected. I mean, he was involved in all these tujar and
Yes.
merchant dealings, high level decision whether to compose councils of businessmen in Iran or not, and
Yeah.
had a lot of lands almost
yes,
everywhere.
yes, that's true.
But it seemed that in that period was probably some tolerance in regard to it. Otherwise, I can't explain this very, very unusual phenomenon.
I think yes, I can't explain it either, but I think it seems that often during the history of the Baha'i faith there have been sort of ups and downs and unpredictable treatment. Even now in Iran, with all the persecution going on, there are occasionally, you hear of instances where people are, left alone or even respected, or it doesn't seem to follow a logic all the time.
Yeah, but not having high-ranking positions.
No, but there have been times also in the history of the faith.
But we have to understand that he was, the president of the Majlis of Tujar. It was this Majlis which, in a way, acted as a mahkama, as a court, tribunal of the local merchants, and also between local merchants and foreign merchants. And he was heading this Majlis.
Yeah.
And in this sense, he had a lot of power, and he was in direct connection with the governor. I mean, the government had to, in fact, take these decisions and somehow work together to
Yes, I suppose they must have
I
seen.
wondered. No, I really asked how come, and then when Rittich, a Russian traveler, came to Yazd, he's telling how respected he was and important. Working with the Russians, with the
Yes.
governor, one of the main figures locally, I mean, economically, socially, and everybody knows he's.
Yes, but I suppose they must have thought that his influence in general and his uprightness and so on kind of outweighed his religious. That they probably saw it as a personal thing that they could somehow discount or set aside because it suited their own purposes to have somebody who was trustworthy, and it's interesting.
We shouldn't forget that he was representative of the Russians.
Yes, that too. Yes,
even he had
kind of
Persian
protection there. Yes.
guarding his house and his household.
Yeah. Yes. Of course. That's
status
also.
that you cannot.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if he received the Russian protection. If he was a Russian citizen.
No, I don't. Not as far as I know.
I'm not sure that not. I'm not.
No, he received Russian protection.
Protection? No, legal protection. He was a Russian citizen.
I'm not sure, but he had.
Yeah.
Because of his representing
right.
Russian, he has
But
a
under the
protected
calculation,
status.
The imtiyazat, under the imtiyazat,
Yes.
all the
Concessions.
agreements, concessions. If you were able, in certain cases, to receive foreign citizenship, nationality.
Yes.
Okay, there were very few cases where Baha'is managed to get Russian or British citizenship, and then they were protected to an extent. The property couldn't be confiscated.
Yeah.
if they went to if they were entered for
He got the Russian medal, gold medal, and the banner, Russian banner was on his top of his
that
house.
doesn't necessarily mean
Yes,
could have been
well, that would be an interesting research
He's one
project for the
getting
future to see
yeah.
if actually, I mean, what
but
the
it could
extent was.
explain to an extent his position.
But from my point, I mean, this is fascinating
It's
actually.
very interesting,
Yes,
He
yes,
was the
it was.
grandfather of your father.
Yes, that's right. But what's in a way, from a different aspect, is interesting is that he left all of this.
Yes.
In fact, in 1900, because in Ashgabat at the time they had it had become a sort of flourishing regional center, and many Baha'is were living there. It had become a strong Baha'i community, and the two brothers, they had bought some land there, and Baha'u'llah asked them to set aside one of these pieces of land for the building of a Baha'i house of worship. So in 1900, Abdul Baha asked Haji Muhammad Ali to go to Ashgabat and start building. And so he left all of this power and privilege and wealth and so on, and went to Ashgabat and dedicated himself entirely to this task. And not only did he supervise the work, but they sold all the remaining property of the Afnan in Ashgabat to fund the work, and he spent all of his own personal resources, all his own wealth, almost to the point that there was, just barely enough left for him to live. He spent all of his financial resources to fund the work and to buy the building materials, and the building was almost completed by 1906, and then he left the work to his son Haji Mirza Mahmud and came to the Holy Land and spent the last 2 years of his life in Haifa. And I think that when the remains of the Bab were interred in his shrine in 1909, this is the 100th anniversary, he was among those present at the interment. And he's buried in the Baha'i cemetery in Haifa.
The first to be buried.
Is he? Okay.
I think so.
Yes.
The first
person to be buried?
The first.
Maybe? I
yes.
don't know. That.
As far as
It's
I know.
right in the center.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, it's the first.
Yeah.
It's the
Yes.
first.
I can
Yes.
believe that.
That's quite possible. He was full of joy and radiance, and in Baghdad he was known among the Baha'is as Afnan Mali, the delightful Afnan. And his whole life was a testament to his selflessness and humility, despite all the prominence that he enjoyed. Okay.
A book should be written about him.
A book.
Yes.
Trying to do it an article is very difficult.
Yes.
The sources difficult.
Maybe you can help.
That's one of the questions.
Maybe an article. I don't know, the book. I hope my children one day can do that.
No, the only one that can do it is your father.
Yes,
And
perhaps. Yeah.
you told me about these two cases of documents, of business documents that they
Yes.
had you had in their home there, and they
Yes.
confiscated this, and
Yes.
it's
So
all here now,
that's why
whatever.
I'm thinking that maybe
Yeah,
my
there's so many
children or
phases
grandchildren
and
will.
stages in his life, so
Yes, we'll be able to get the documents back somehow if they're not
where are the
destroyed. We
documents
hope.
now?
Well, my father had a whole huge case, or
Two
almost
cases
a
you
room
told
full
me. Yes.
in Iran. But when we left, it was left behind. So I
So
don't
it's
think.
still there.
I hope
No,
so.
they
Who knows?
took it, yeah.
It's hard to know
I
what
mean,
has happened
was
to
left
them.
in Iran, that's it.
Yes, yes. I mean, it might have been destroyed.
You
Or
told me they confiscated the whole property and
Yes.
the two cases.
The government.
Yeah.
so. Wanted also to mention that the families of the Bab and Baha'u'llah were joined through several marriages. The wife of the Bab asked for the hand of one of the daughters of Baha'u'llah for her nephew, Sayyid Ali, who was the son of the great Afnan whom we talked about. Unfortunately, after Baha'u'llah's passing, this couple, Sayyid Ali and Furuqiyah Khanum, his wife, they turned against Abdul Baha, and they and their descendants became among the most inveterate enemies of Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi later on. Also, two of Abdul Baha's daughters, Tuba Khanum, she married Mirza Mohsen, another son of Haji Mirza Sayyid Hassan, and Ziya Khanum, the eldest daughter of Abdul Baha, married Mirza Hadi, who was the grandson of the other brother of the wife of the Bab, and their son, Shoghi Effendi, was Abdul Baha's successor and the guardian of the Baha'i faith.
Is Tuba Khanum from the Afnan, the Afnan family, or from the outside?
No,
because it's a Jewish name.
No, she's the daughter of Abdul Baha.
Okay. No.
Yes. So, but Tuba is
Tuba is a Tova, actually, in Hebrew. It's
yes, goods or
very
blessed.
much.
Yes. Yeah.
You have this also in
it's Arabic and Persian. It's a common name. Yes. Yes. No, it's quite a relatively common
just
name.
Just ask.
Yes. No. Yes.
Interesting.
So, right. So, so in a sense, Shoghi Effendi, you can say, is the most distinguished member of the Afnan family. But on the other hand, because of his direct descent from Baha'u'llah and his connection to Abdul Baha and his rank as the guardian of the Baha'i faith, nobody thinks of him as an Afnan as such, and it seems almost presumptuous to make that family connection. But he is the Abdul Baha says that he's the branch that has grown from the twin holy trees, so Baha'u'llah and the Bab as the two trees of which this joint branch of Shoghi Effendi has grown.
He didn't use the name Afnan.
No, he didn't. He used the Rabbani as the family
some of
name.
His cousins did.
Yes, so the children of Tuba Khanum and Mirza Mohsen, they used Afnan as the family name. Yeah. Okay, so this isn't really the time to present the life and services of Shoghi Effendi, but just to briefly say that he guided the Baha'i community for 36 years, from the passing of Abdul Baha in 1921 till his own death in 1957. He translated many of the writings of Baha'u'llah, wrote a history of the first century of the Baha'i faith called God Passes By. He built the superstructure of the shrine of the Bab, created all these beautiful gardens, planned the arc along which the administrative buildings of the Baha'i faith are built. He built the archives building, completed and planned several of the houses of worship in the Baha'i world, and so on. So, and the period of his guardianship is the beginning of the so-called formative age of the Baha'i faith, and this has seen the spread of the Baha'i faith to all corners of the globe. This started under Abdul Baha's guidance, who encouraged the Baha'is to travel to Europe and to travel beyond the Middle East, and he himself traveled to Europe and America and told people about the Baha'i faith. And then this became much more systematic under Shoghi Effendi's guidance, so that Baha'is traveled to many corners of the world to share their beliefs, and this is known in the Baha'i community as pioneering. And the Baha'is in Iran during roughly the period from the 20s to the 70s enjoyed a much greater measure of freedom and security than they had previously. So they were able to strengthen the Baha'i community and increase their resources and their both human and material resources. And it was during this period many of these pioneers, many of these travelers came from Iran and spread to many parts of the world. The persecution of the Baha'i community that followed the revolution in Iran put a stop to this voluntary movement, because travel was severely restricted. Those who were abroad were not able to come back safely to Iran, and every kind of pressure and persecution imaginable was inflicted on the Baha'is and continues to happen today, including the killing of 200 Baha'is and the destruction of the House of the Bab in Shiraz. And the members of the Afnan family, again, are represented in both these processes that saw the spreading of the Iranian Baha'is in different parts of the world. As I mentioned earlier, before most of them married second or third cousins. The new generation began to marry people outside the family, from different religions in some cases, from even different countries gradually. More and more were able to get higher education both in Iran and abroad, and they engaged in all kinds of new professions and trades, and no longer were they really merchants or landowners, but they became part of the emerging upper middle class in Iranian society. Some emigrated from Iran to pursue their education or their careers, and at the time of the Islamic Revolution, there were many of the Afnan who were already living elsewhere in the world. And after the revolution, many more were forced to leave and became refugees because of the persecution.
Are there any left in Iran?
Yes, there are. Many fewer than there were before, but yes, there are some.
Whereabouts in Iran?
In Yazd, in Tehran, Shiraz, yes. The ones I know are those three places, probably, maybe some others as well.
Any idea how big is the tribe all over the world?
You do a gathering of...
We had a kind of reunion.
Families like that, and they have their gatherings, and they come, like the Wiglings by thousands.
At the Baha'i World Congress in 1992 in New York, we had a family reunion, and there, that was a small section, but maybe around 100 or so who met there. But I think altogether there's probably several hundred. I don't know how many hundred, 500 or 600, something like that. Under 1,000, I would say.
Under the name of Afnan, yes, they
not all are under the name of Afnan either. Many are married, and even some of the older generation of Afnan didn't actually use the name Afnan. There are Alai, Taqavi, Mahdavi, names that are kind of related but not strictly Afnan. Yeah. Okay, I really need to finish. So I just wanted to mention a couple of just three more members of the Afnan family of this newer generation who have distinguished themselves really. One of them is Hassan Balyuzi, who was a great grandson of one of the brothers of the wife of the Bab, and he worked for many years for the Persian section of the BBC in England, where he lived almost all his life. He was very active in the administration of the Baha'i faith for many years, and he was appointed as a hand of the cause. You will remember I mentioned them. He was appointed as a hand of the cause by Shoghi Effendi in 1957. He was a prolific writer and historian, and wrote books about the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, the wife of the Bab, E.G. Brown, the Prophet Muhammad, and his works are carefully researched and meticulously documented so that they're the source for much of what I have said can be found in his works. And he also established the Afnan Library Trust for research into the Baha'i faith. And this is a library that contains about 10,000 books at present, and many manuscripts and other materials. I think Mujan Momen was at least the one who trustee, or yes,
England?
in England, yes, because he left all his own library, and then some other collections have been added to it since. They have a website.
Have you looked through it to see whether there is any material?
No, not physically. I mean, I've looked at their website, but there you can't really.
That there is,
Yes,
probably.
yes, Probably,
Yeah.
I would think so, because his own manuscripts are there. So, of course, he used many of them for his book. So I don't know if there's anything new and unused, but yes. And another person that merits a mention is Bahram Afnan, who was one of these 200 Baha'is who were killed during the revolution. He was a prominent physician in Shiraz, and was imprisoned for about 8 months, and tortured, and put a lot of psychological and physical pressure to recant his faith as a Baha'i, and was put on a so-called trial for being a Baha'i. And he and 5 other men were executed in June of 1983, and 2 days later 10 Baha'i women, the youngest of whom was only 17, Mona, who's known among Baha'is, that they were executed 2 days later.
With a beautiful smile.
Yes, yes. And another person that Abbas Afnan, who was a very prolific traveler. I don't have a picture of him. He traveled many places and lived in many places in the service of the Baha'i faith, including England, Ethiopia, Canada, Slovenia, Hungary, and so on. And I just wanted to mention that, as far as I know, there are Baha'is now living in, there are Afnan living in Canada, the United States, Brazil, the UK, France, Norway, Denmark, Serbia, Turkey, Kuwait, China, and Australia, and perhaps other places that I don't know, but these are at least. So they have really spread out from their origins in Shiraz. And I just thought I would end with on a personal note, with a mention of my father, whom many of you know. This is with his grandchildren, so the future generations of the Afnan. The oldest boy, Nabil, and Noura are my children, and the 2 little boys are my brother's sons. As you saw from one of these earlier, yes, he is directly descended from Khala Akbar, and then Haji Muhammad Ali Vakil al-Dawla. And he, in many ways, I felt it would be appropriate to mention him, because he, in some ways, represents the contemporary Afnan. He received a university education in veterinary medicine and bacteriology. He was a professor at the University of Tehran for many years. He met my mother, who was a doctor also, through Baha'i youth activities, not through the family. He served in the Baha'i administration for many years. He was the secretary of the local spiritual assembly of Tehran. And then he moved away from Iran in 1978. We went to Norway, planning to settle there, but we were unable to do so, and he was advised not to return to Iran because the revolution had broken and it was unsafe. And then we moved to Canada, where my father continued to work as a researcher. He has loved the Baha'i writings and Persian literature from the time he was a youth, and he devoted himself to their study, so that he gradually became a scholar, really through his own personal study, and especially in the area of the writings of the Bab. He is one of a handful of experts in the Baha'i world. They start...
In the world, not in the Baha'i world, in the world.
Well, yes, in this case it's the same. Yes. In 1987, my parents started the Association for Baha'i Studies in Persian in Canada, and then 2 years later came to the Baha'i World Center, to the research department, where they served for 13 years. And he is also very knowledgeable about the history of the Afnan, so that I owe him a tremendous debt for much of the information and sort of insight into the family's life in writing for this paper. So, as I've discovered, it's not easy to cover all that I want to say in such a short space. I've tried to provide a general outline of the family's business and social standing, but Afnan's distinction lies first and foremost in their connection to the Bab. At the same time, it's clear from the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah that this relationship is not of much value unless it's supported by faith and service. In a tablet addressed to Haji Muhammad Ali Afnan, not actually this tablet, but I just thought so you get an idea of what these writings of Baha'u'llah sometimes look like. But in another tablet, he writes, "The Afnan have been called into being out of nothingness in order to serve God." And it's for this reason that I've devoted so much to individuals who have united a distinguished lineage with a noble character and notable services. Because the ones that I've chosen, I think, are ones who have, whether or not they followed the tradition of trade and mercantile activity of the family, they did follow the Bab's path of trading in the goodly gifts of God in what they did. And they recognized the truth of Baha'u'llah's words, who said, "It becomes the Afnan to devote themselves to the service of the cause. This is for them true commerce and spiritual profit. By God, this profit will not be overtaken by loss and will never alter." So, thank you very much for your patience.